Twice a year I go to this continuing education workshop where I sit down with pastors from all sorts of denominations. And I'm a fascinating exotic creature to many of them. Unitarian Universalists. And they look at me like I know I looked at the Komodo dragon the first time I saw one in the zoo. They get very curious. And I can't blame those I've talked to about Unitarian Universalism in the many years past for thinking that we might just be the church of the equivocal answer. Because that's all I had to give them, using the inside language. Well, do you all believe in God? Well, yes and no. Some of us do, yes, some of us don't. Some of us aren't sure. Some of us change our opinion from day to day. Well, do you use the Bible? Well, yes and no. Some of us still like it. Do you pray? Yes and no. I can keep a Baptist minister going in circles with that for hours. Mildly entertaining. Not effective communication. I need to be able to speak the language of the other. And that means I've got to pick up those perfectly good words that I dropped, dust them off a little bit, and put them back in my toolbox. That's an uncomfortable idea for some folks I know. Getting involved with language you thought you left behind is scary. I know, because the minute I published the title of the sermon, I started getting feedback on it before I even gave it. If you know what I'm going to say on a Sunday, send me notes, please, because I get to my day off that much quicker. It's frightening. But I'm not asking you to do something untoward with the language. I'm not asking you to use uncomfortable language so that you can become something you're not, so that we can become something we're not. I'm asking you to do it so that we can shift the nature of the conversation. There are those who tell me that language dies when it takes on a negative meaning, that we can't use the word again. The language is a living thing. It breathes. It breathes. It adapts to the situations that it exists in. That's why we have Southern English and Northern English and British English and all of those hybrids like Spanglish and Chinglish. Language changes to fit its situation. In China, over the last several years, if you want to be part of the pro-democracy movement, you've got to be very creative with the language that you use. Because the communist government of China tries very hard to cut away the language you can use to communicate if you're not part of the party. The government and Google have been collaborating for years on limiting the returns you get from the search engine when you put certain words into it. So that in China, if you Google freedom, you're not going to get the full span of answers, or human rights, you're not going to get the full span of answers. And over this last year, as the Middle East has started changing shape, the list of words that you can't get the full set of answers for on Google when you're in China has expanded with it. So that if you type in Tunisia, your answers are going to be very limited. If you type in Egypt, you're not going to get the full picture. If you type in Tahrir Square, no way. And the people of the pro-democracy movement in China know that they've got to get creative with the language at hand if they're going to survive and communicate and make a change. And all they needed to do was latch on to one word. One word in China had all the power to get them back in where the government had cut them out. The word is Yang Hui. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The best possible English translation of that word is two meetings. That's all it means. pretty inoffensive, beyond Qui. But it also happens to be the official Communist Party word to call the party together for its annual spring meetings. Because the two meetings of the two sects of the Communist Party come together every spring. The pro-democracy movement has started to use that word with abandon as they try to schedule their own protests and events, signaling that we're paying attention to your meetings, for one thing, and that you can't keep us quiet. They didn't change the meaning of the word. They didn't redefine it completely to mean something that it wasn't. They just took a word that was in existence that they knew couldn't be taken away with them without causing too much damage to the ruling party, and brought themselves from the outside back into the conversation. That's what I'm talking about today. Not taking a word and giving it a completely new definition that no one will accept, not engaging in some sort of theological doublespeak or the type of language Congress uses to title its bills lately, not giving it a meaning that doesn't exist because it won't help communicating with the outside. I'm talking about understanding the language of the other, the language of the outsider, so that we can explain ourselves in a way that gets us back in. In other words, to walk back from the Babel metaphor and walk into the idea of Pentecost. When the day of Pentecost had come, the disciples were all together in one place, and suddenly from heaven there came a sound like the rush of a violent wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as a fire appeared among them, and a tongue rested on each of them, and all of them were filled with the Spirit, and they began to speak in other languages. Now there were devout Jews from every nation under heaven living in Jerusalem, and at this sound the crowd gathered and was bewildered, because each one heard them speaking in the native language of each. Amazed and astonished, they asked, "Are not all these who are speaking Galileans? How is it that we hear, each of us, in our own native language?" Now, I have bad news this morning. The tongues of fire probably aren't coming yet. But the end product, that's the goal. The world needs to hear us speaking their language. The language of the inner circle is useless after we've said amen and walked out the door. The language of the inner circle at the end of a Sunday is navel-gazing. And the longer you stare at your navel, the more you risk falling into it. The world needs to hear us speaking their language. Will it bring everyone around to our way of thinking? Probably not. Will it convert the whole world to Unitarian Universalism? God, I hope not. How boring would that world be? But it will, quite possibly, bring us back to a point where we can once again share something of a common language together. And as God so feared in the story of the Tower of Babel, maybe then nothing will be impossible for us. Who knows? Maybe so.